Richard Williams, masterclass artist and renowned American animation director, wrote in his best-selling textbook, The Animator's Survival Kit, "Good drawing is not copying the surface. It has to do with understanding and expression. We don't want to learn to draw just to end up being imprisoned and showing off our knowledge of joints and muscles. We want to get the kind of reality that a camera can't get. We want to accentuate and suppress aspects of the model's character to make it more vivid." Animation, as an entertainment medium and art form, serves as one of the most versatile forms of storytelling. Uninhibited by filming location, actor appearance, camera equipment, and physical prop or set design, the animated cartoon has free rein to whisk away the willing viewer into strange, alien, unfamiliar worlds, teeming with the lusciousness and vibrancy that man can only manifest in a dream. In many ways, animation provides a direct pipeline from the mind to the screen. Animation can also elicit intense and resonant feelings. The characters and iconography depicted in these moving images are innately crafted from the building blocks of human emotion. The reason why characters like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck continue to persist in Americana is because they hold a mirror to our own ideologies, flaws, strengths, and insecurities, albeit in exaggerated methods. Ultimately, animation serves as a window through which to view the world via distinct visual aesthetics. Dozens of major Hollywood studios, hundreds of smaller companies, and thousands of independent creators have taken to animation as a means to explore their illustrated perspective, influenced by their unique backgrounds, life experiences, and artistic upbringing. Not dissimilar to the advent of photography, the earliest animated works were crude, yet showed potential with what could be done with loops of moving images. The spectacle of an illustration in motion was enough to captivate audiences by itself. As the medium continued to evolve, animation began to take on more fantastical premises, featuring characters and scenarios that could only feasibly be depicted on pencil and paper. Walt Disney's studio and Warner Brothers were some of the first to pioneer mainstream animation for theatergoers. In 1937, the former produced the first feature-length animated film in America, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Despite the film's storybook setting and whimsical elements, a heavy emphasis was placed on depicting Snow White, the dwarves, and the witch with realistic full movement that glided smoothly. Animated characters, regardless of intent, comedy, or drama, were designed with full motion in mind. Composed from simple shapes, models were often depicted highly detailed to account for a bevy of angles and movement. Full character animation, typically drawn with 24 frames per second, would become synonymous with the genre. Similarly, backgrounds were lavishly designed, with layout artists crafting meticulous, three-dimensional landscapes for characters to run, jump, and frolic through. The golden age of Hollywood and the high studio budgets that were allotted during the 1940s through the 1950s accommodated this process, allowing studio artists to render their short films with nigh unlimited degrees of movement and freedom. It was in the mid-1950s, however, that stylistic changes from the traditional Golden Age cartoon began to be implemented. United Productions of America, or UPA for short, were of the first to pioneer a new aesthetic style, one that is recognized among contemporary audiences as limited animation. Through short subjects like Mr. Magoo and Gerald McBoing Boing, UPA created films that moved around in a wholly inventive graphic manner that is as stylized as their designs, in an excerpt from Cartoon Modern. Pete Docter, chief executive officer at Pixar, would speak of UPA's direction as movement based on feelings rather than anatomy. As limited animation would continue to spread its influence, other studios would begin to understand the potential cost-cutting benefits of the technique. It's easy for modern-day audiences to understand and associate limited animation with slapdash productions created for the early advent of television by studios like Hanna-Barbera. After all, most of our parents, and a high degree of even the current generation, became accustomed to comparing both styles side by side when Golden Age cartoons arrived in syndication. To many, it was evident that the Golden Age cartoons utilized a greater quantity of drawings, which led to a more polished and complete work. However, while it is abundantly clear that these series created for television necessitated a cheaper production and quicker turnaround times, the reason characters like Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, Quick Draw McGraw, and the Flintstones continue to permeate the cultural zeitgeist are due to their unique character personalities and distinct design elements. As Japanese animator Mori Takuya describes in an introduction to animation written in 1966, it was former Disney animators who founded UPA and initially experimented with limited animation techniques. Stylistically, the idea was to move away from elaborate detail in drawing, reducing images to graphic designs and iconic figures, while limiting the number of drawings per second. He would go on to state that he views limited animation not merely as a cost-cutting measure, though he's aware of its potential, but as a modern art of animation in contrast to the classroom of full animation. Speaking to graphic design and iconic figures, a trait that I've always admired about Hanna-Barbera's characters is their recognizability in silhouette. The benefit of their angled designs and makeup of simple shapes is their ability to stand out under nearly any context. Snagglepuss, for example, has an autonomy completely separate from Top Cat, two felines from the same production studio. The intent with UPA's features was to pare characters down to their base elements, leaving only what was integral to their intent and emotion. It calls the audience's primary attention to broad emotional strokes, communicated not simply through dialogue, movement, or facial expression, but baked into the characters' design philosophy themselves. Backgrounds, too, in cartoons from studios of this period would shift its primary focus from providing a sense of place in favor of providing only what is necessary. Architecturally accurate homes and storefronts gave way to off-kilter environments with sharp angles and uneven set pieces. Oftentimes, only the rough outline for various background elements were utilized, leaving them to be enveloped by a single chosen color for the scene. These flat primary colors were also less concerned with providing a sense of place, but rather served to accentuate the emotions of the character and action on screen. Famously, industry veteran Chuck Jones would stretch character design fundamentals to its absolute limit with his 1965 Oscar-winning short film The Dot and the Line, based on a book by the same name written by Norton Juster. The two main characters in the film are referred to simply by their physical makeup, a dot and a line. The narration throughout ascribes thought and characteristics to these shapes with the same thoroughness as an author would to any fully realized character, creating a provoking thesis statement in the process. A character's design can be whittled down to the most minuscule components and remain effective as long as the audience has reason to become compelled by their plight and resonate with them. The line is depicted as stiff, awkward, and straightforward in his attempts to court the dot in romance, perfectly complemented by his status as a line, with nary a bend or a curve. He literally fills a portion of the screen top to bottom with blunt, unchanging verticality. The dot, in contrast, is presented as fun-loving and as the object of allure. A circle, by technicality, is nothing but curve, and this fact certainly ascribes the dot with a feminine persuasion. She is dainty and free to move about the screen, bouncing every which way as her shape allows. So too does the abstraction of background elements aid the story. In the sequence where the line is talking about the dot, the visuals literally place his idea of her on a pedestal. These minimal background furnishings are an explicit aid of the story and its emotional context for the two characters. As Ronald Holloway, animation historian, describes, by limiting the drawings, the characters are freed from realistic movement and are given a charismatic life of their own, thereby increasing the film's tempo and enriching scenes with new forms of expression. This definition is still consistent with full animation's appeal. To animate is to give life and soul to design, through the transformation of reality. In today's animation landscape, limited animation has held its ground as a valid and powerful form of expression. Many contemporary, critically renowned series and films benefit from limited animation techniques in ways that aid writing style, visual aesthetic, and character personality. Home Movies, for example, created by comedian Brendan Small for UPN in 1999, utilizes a distinct animation technique titled squiggle vision, wherein character outlines will continuously jitter on screen, even while a single pose is held. It gives the show a visual air of loose spontaneity, which is reflected in its improvisational approach to plot and character dialogue. Brendan and his peers will often burst into sudden bouts of extreme emotion in the midst of a dull conversation. This is accentuated by the tendency for characters to jump between key poses without any in-between frames. In this way, Home Movie's lack of fluidity is its key animation strength. The Lego Movie, released in 2015 by Warner Animation Group, utilizes limited animation in a three-dimensional space to emulate the look and feel of stop-motion films. While the cast and their surroundings are generated via computer, characters hold on an even amount of frames whilst moving from action to action. That is to say, no movement is completely smooth. The same approach aids the recently released Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse from Sony Pictures Animation. The film is inspired and borrows heavily from American comic book aesthetics, right down to the emulation of how one would typically read a comic book. Because comics are a literary medium, motion must be implied, rather than directly created. Pages are laid out in such a way that the reader can directly follow a line of action, from panel to panel in sequence. This small latency between one panel to the next is reflected in Spider-Verse via the same frame hold technique. As Danny Dimian, the film's VFX supervisor, describes in an interview with Vulture, the whole movie is grounded with what we call stepped animation. That means the animation doesn't change every frame. Characters will be held up for 1 frame, 2 frames, or 3 frames so that their motion looks jittery. We were trying to find the right spirit, in the way that all animated productions go through a period of free-form exploration. We were going through styles and ideas, looking for something that felt right, and found that the traditional rendering techniques just weren't working for us. By swaying away from these traditional techniques, Demian's team effectively accentuates key dynamic poses and provides stark visual clarity in high-intensity action scenes. Both the LEGO Movie and Into the Spider-Verse were spearheaded by creatives Phil Lord and Chris Miller, both no stranger to utilizing limited animation to elicit tone and atmosphere, dating back to their work on MTV's Clone High, in which the characters' sharp angles and recognizable silhouettes harken back to the design philosophies of Hanna-Barbera. From its avant-garde conception in the 1950s to its practical application in film and television today, limited animation continues to evolve and shape stylistic trends into the 21st century. The approach is long separated from its stigma as a cheap, cost-cutting alternative to full animation and stands firmly behind some of today's most critically acclaimed and aesthetically diverse projects.